David was the kind of person you'd walk past without a second glance. He worked on the 15th floor of a glass tower downtown, spending his days buried in spreadsheets and financial reports. For 3 years, he'd been doing the same job at Meridian Industries, checking numbers, making charts, and attending meetings where he barely spoke. His cubicle sat in the middle of a sea of identical workspaces. His co-workers knew his name. But that was about it. David liked it that way. No drama, no pressure, just steady work and a paycheck that paid the bills. He drove the same route to work every morning, ate lunch at his desk, and went home to his small apartment where he watched TV and ordered takeout. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in October. The rumors had been flying for weeks. Meridian Industries was being bought out. Nobody knew by who or what would happen to their jobs. People whispered in the break room and sent worried text messages. But David just kept working. He figured worrying wouldn't change anything. Then she walked in. Victoria Castellane didn't just enter the building. She owned it the moment she stepped through the doors. At 34, she was already famous in the business world. Magazines called her the Iron Empress because she'd built her company from nothing into a billion-dollar empire. She was known for taking over struggling companies and turning them into gold mines. David first saw her during the big meeting in the main conference room. All 200 employees were crammed in there, sitting in rows of folding chairs. Victoria stood at the front wearing a sharp black suit, her blonde hair pulled back perfectly. She had these intense green eyes that seemed to look right through people. Meridian Industries is now part of the Castellane Group, she announced, in a voice that commanded attention. For most of you, nothing will change. You'll keep your jobs, your salaries, your benefits. But we're going to run things differently now. We're going to run them better. She talked about efficiency and growth and maximizing potential. David half listened while doodling on his notepad. He'd heard speeches like this before when companies changed hands. New boss, same job. He figured, after the meeting, department heads had to present their quarterly reports to Victoria and her team. David's boss, Mr. Peterson, was sweating bullets. The sales numbers weren't great, and everyone knew it. David sat in the back corner of the boardroom, taking notes. He wasn't supposed to be there, really, but Peterson had asked him to bring the financial backup files just in case. Victoria sat at the head of the long table, flanked by her advisors in expensive suits. Peterson stumbled through his presentation, clicking through slides about market penetration and customer retention. David could see the numbers were wrong. The quarterly projections were inflated by at least 20%. It was probably just a mistake. Someone had copied last year's optimistic forecasts instead of this year's reality, but nobody was saying anything. Peterson kept talking, Victoria kept listening, and the wrong numbers kept flashing on the screen. David felt his stomach twist. If they made decisions based on fake numbers, people could lose their jobs. The company could lose millions. He looked around the room at all the important people in their expensive clothes, and none of them seemed to notice. His hand shot up before he could stop himself. "Excuse me," David said, his voice cracking slightly. The room went dead quiet. Victoria's green eyes swiveled toward him like searchlights. Peterson's face went white. "The numbers on slide 12, David continued, his heart pounding. "They're from last year's projections, not this year's actuals. The real figure should be about 4.2 million, not 5.1. You could have heard a pin drop. Victoria stared at him for what felt like forever. David wanted to disappear into his chair. "And you are?" Victoria asked. "David Chen. I work in financial analysis." Victoria looked at Peterson, then back at David. "Show me." David's hand shook as he opened his laptop and connected it to the projector. He pulled up the real numbers, the ones that showed where the company actually stood. They weren't as pretty as Peterson's version, but they were honest. Victoria studied the screen, then looked at her advisors. They were whispering among themselves, checking their own notes and tablets. "You're right," Victoria said finally. "The difference is significant." Peterson started stammering apologies and explanations, but Victoria held up her hand to silence him. "The meeting's over," she announced. Everyone out except, she pointed directly at David. You, stay. The room emptied quickly. Peterson shot David a look that could have melted steel as he packed up his things. Soon it was just David and Victoria, alone in the big boardroom with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Victoria walked around the table until she was standing right in front of him. Up close, she was even more intimidating. She had this presence that made the air feel electric. "How long have you been doing Peterson's job for him?" she asked. "I'm sorry. Those numbers you just showed me, that analysis, that's not entry-level work, so either you're much smarter than your position suggests, or you've been covering for an incompetent boss." David didn't know how to answer that without getting Peterson in trouble or himself fired. "I just noticed things," he said quietly. Victoria smiled for the first time since he met her. It wasn't a warm smile exactly, but it wasn't cold either. It was the smile of someone who just found something valuable. "What else have you noticed?" For the next hour, Victoria grilled him about the company. She asked about inefficiencies, problems, opportunities for improvement. David found himself talking more than he had in months, explaining issues he'd observed but never felt important enough to mention. Victoria listened to everything, occasionally taking notes on her phone. She asked smart questions that showed she understood the business better than most people who'd worked there for years. Finally, she sat back in her chair and studied him. "David Chen," she said, like she was testing how his name sounded. "I have a proposition for you." David's mouth went dry. "I need someone I can trust, someone who sees what others miss, someone who tells me the truth even when it's uncomfortable." She leaned forward. "I want you to work directly for me. Personal advisor, strategic consultant, whatever title you want. Triple your current salary, private office, direct access to me whenever you need it." David blinked. "I don't understand." "It's simple. I'm offering you a job. A real job. Not pushing papers in a cubicle. You'd be part of my inner circle, involved in major decisions, helping shape the future of this company." It sounded too good to be true. People like David didn't get offers like this. They worked their whole careers without ever being noticed by people like Victoria Castellane. "Why me?" he asked. Victoria stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city spread below them. "Because you're honest, because you're smart, and because you're not trying to impress me or play politics. You just told me the truth when everyone else is willing to let me make $1 million mistake." She turned back to him. "That's exactly what I need." David felt like he was in a dream. This morning he'd been nobody. Now one of the most powerful women in the country was offering to change his entire life. "I need an answer," Victoria said. "Not tomorrow, not next week, right now." David looked around the empty boardroom, then back at Victoria's expectant face. He thought about his cubicle, his routine, his small apartment with its stack of unpaid bills. "Yes," he heard himself say. "Yes, I'll take it." Victoria's smile this time was different, warmer, but somehow more intense too. "Excellent," she said. "Your new life starts tomorrow." As David walked out of that boardroom, he felt like he was floating. He'd been chosen, selected, picked out of hundreds of people by someone who could have anyone she wanted working for her. He had no idea that being chosen by Victoria Castellane was less like winning the lottery and more like being caught in a web, a beautiful, golden web that would soon become impossible to escape. David's first day in his new position felt like stepping into a different world. His cubicle was gone, replaced by a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that probably cost more than his old annual salary. The nameplate on his door read Strategic Advisor in gold letters. Victoria had kept her promise about the money too. His new paycheck was almost 3 times what he used to make. For the first time in his adult life, David didn't have to worry about paying rent or buying groceries. He could actually save money, maybe even think about buying a car that wasn't held together with prayer and duct tape. But the best part wasn't the money or the fancy office. It was feeling important for the first time in his life, Victoria included. Him in everything. Board meetings that used to happen behind closed doors. David was there, sitting right next to her, taking notes and offering opinions. Strategic planning sessions with department heads, Victoria would turn to him and ask, "What do you think, David?" And people actually listened to his answers. His old co-workers looked at him differently now. They called him Mr. Chen instead of just David. They asked for his advice on projects and invited him to lunch. Peterson, his former boss, practically bowed whenever they passed in the hallway. The transformation happened so fast it made David's head spin. One week he was invisible. The next week everyone wanted to be his friend. Victoria made it clear that his opinion mattered to her. She'd call him into her office 3 or 4 times a day, sometimes for business, sometimes just to talk. She wanted to know what he thought about new initiatives, potential partnerships, even personnel decisions. "I trust your judgment," she'd tell him. "You see things clearly, without all the politics and backstabbing that clouds everyone else's vision." David felt like he'd won the lottery and been struck by lightning at the same time. This was what success felt like. This was what it meant to matter. But then the small changes started. It began with the lunch invitations. David's college roommate, Jake, called one day, wanting to meet up at their usual spot downtown. David was about to say yes when Victoria knocked on his office door. "David, I need you to review these contracts over lunch," she said, dropping a stack of papers on his desk. "The Singapore deal can't wait." David called Jake back and canceled. "Work stuff," he explained. "You know how it is." The same thing happened the next week with his sister Amy. She wanted to catch up over dinner, but Victoria scheduled an emergency strategy session that ran until 9 p.m. Then it was his buddy from the gym, then his neighbor who'd become a good friend each time. Victoria had a perfectly reasonable explanation. The work was urgent, the deadlines were real, the opportunities couldn't be missed. David understood. This was the price of success. Important people had to make sacrifices. Victoria started suggesting where he should live too. "That apartment of yours is in such a rough neighborhood," she said one day, looking concerned. "It's not safe for someone in your position. What if competitors try to get information from you? What if someone breaks in?" She had a solution, of course. The company owned several apartments in a luxury building downtown, executive housing. She called it better security, closer to the office, and the company pays for everything. It just makes sense. The new apartment was incredible. Floor-to-ceiling windows, granite countertops, furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine. David had never lived anywhere so nice. He felt like he was living someone else's life. But the building was isolated. Most of his old friends lived on the other side of town, and the commute to visit them became a hassle. Plus, David was working longer hours now. Victoria needed him to review reports in the evenings, attend dinner meetings with clients, and be available for international calls at odd hours. The global market never sleeps, Victoria explained. "If we want to stay competitive, we have to be available when opportunities arise." David's social life began to shrink without him really noticing. Fewer phone calls from friends, fewer invitations to hang out. When people did call, he often had to cancel because of work. Eventually, they stopped calling as much. Victoria filled that gap. She included him in company social events, introduced him to other executives, made sure he felt connected to the corporate world she inhabited. She'd invite him to dinner after long days at the office, saying, "We both have to eat anyway. Might as well discuss the Morrison project while we're at it." These dinners became regular occurrences. Victoria was actually interesting to talk to. When she wasn't being the intimidating CEO, she told stories about building her business empire, shared insights about leadership, and seemed genuinely interested in David's thoughts and opinions. David found himself looking forward to these conversations. Victoria made him feel smart, valuable, like his ideas mattered. She'd ask for his advice on personal matters too, which restaurant to choose for client dinners, what she should say in speeches, even what she thought about art pieces for her office. "You have excellent instincts," she'd tell him. "I don't know what I did before you came along." The compliments felt amazing. David had never been anyone's trusted advisor before. He'd never had someone rely on his judgment for important decisions. It was intoxicating, but somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice started whispering questions. Why did every invitation from old friends seem to conflict with work emergencies? Why did Victoria always need his input on decisions she was perfectly capable of making herself? Why did she seem to know so much about his personal schedule? David pushed these thoughts away. He was being paranoid. Victoria was just dedicated to her work, and she valued his contributions. This was what success looked like. This was what it meant to be essential to someone important. His family started commenting on the changes during his increasingly rare visits home. "You seem different," his mom said during Sunday dinner. "More tense. Are you getting enough sleep?" "You barely visit anymore," Amy added. "And when you do, you're always checking your phone for work messages." David laughed it off. "This is what happens when you get promoted," he explained. "More responsibility means less free time. It's temporary. Once I get settled in the role, things will calm down." But things didn't calm down. If anything, Victoria seemed to need him more as time went on. She'd text him late at night with urgent questions that could have waited until morning. She'd call during weekends to discuss strategies that weren't time-sensitive. She'd schedule meetings during holidays, saying, "I know it's an inconvenience, but this opportunity won't wait." David told himself this was normal. Successful people worked harder. They made sacrifices. They prioritized their careers over personal comfort. The golden handcuffs were so beautiful, so comfortable, that David barely felt them closing around his wrists. Every day brought new responsibilities, new reasons why he was indispensable, new evidence of how much Victoria depended on him. He was living in luxury, earning more money than he'd ever dreamed of, and working closely with one of the most powerful women in the business world. From the outside, his life looked perfect. But late at night, alone in his beautiful corporate apartment, David sometimes felt a strange emptiness. He couldn't quite put his finger on what was missing. His life was better than ever. So why did he sometimes feel like something important was slipping away? He didn't realize yet that what was slipping away was his freedom to choose. And Victoria was making sure he wouldn't get it back. By his second year working for Victoria, David had stopped questioning the strange coincidences in his life. When his gym buddy Tom suddenly got transferred to another city, David figured it was just bad timing. When his college friend Lisa stopped returning his calls after getting a dream job offer in Seattle, he assumed she was too busy settling into her new life. But the pattern was becoming harder to ignore. David first noticed something was wrong when he tried to plan a vacation to visit his parents. They lived 3 hours away in a small town, and he hadn't seen them in months. His mom had been dropping hints about feeling forgotten, and his dad's birthday was coming up. "I need to take a few days off next week," David told Victoria during their morning meeting. "Family stuff." Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment. "Next week? That's unfortunate timing. The Johnson merger is entering the critical phase. I really need you here to handle the financial analysis. Can't someone else do it? Just this once?" Victoria looked genuinely hurt. "David, I thought you understood how important you are to this operation. The Johnson deal is worth $50 million. One mistake could cost us everything." She paused, letting that sink in. "But if your family is more important than the company's future..." The guilt hit David like a punch to the stomach. How could he be so selfish? Victoria depended on him. The company depended on him. His parents would understand. They'd raised him to be responsible. "No, you're right," David said quickly. "The merger comes first. I'll visit them another time." But there was always another merger, another crisis, another reason why David was absolutely essential and couldn't possibly leave. When David finally made it home 2 months later, his parents barely recognized him. He looked older, more tired, and he kept checking his phone every few minutes. "Victoria needs me to review these contracts," he explained, typing responses to her messages during dinner. "The Tokyo deal is happening in a different time zone, so I have to be available." His mom exchanged worried glances with his dad. "Honey, you seem so stressed. Maybe you should take a real break from work, just for a weekend." David laughed. "But It sounded forced even to his own ears. I can't just disappear, Mom. I have responsibilities. Victoria counts on me. What about what you count on? His dad asked quietly. When's the last time you did something just because you wanted to? David couldn't answer that question. The breaking point came when David tried to start dating again. He'd been so focused on work that his romantic life had completely disappeared. But he was 32 now, making great money, and living in a nice apartment. Maybe it was time to find someone special. He met Rachel at a coffee shop near his building. She was smart, funny, and worked as a teacher at a local elementary school. For the first time in months, David felt like himself again. Not Victoria's advisor, not the company's problem solver, just David. They went on 3 dates. And David found himself genuinely happy. Rachel made him laugh. She listened to his stories without immediately connecting them to business opportunities. She reminded him that there was a world outside of corporate boardrooms and financial reports. David was planning to ask Rachel to be his girlfriend when she called him with unexpected news. I got this amazing job offer, she said, excitement bubbling in her voice. It's with the Denver School District. They're offering me twice my current salary and a chance to run their new STEM program. David's heart sank. Denver, that's halfway across the country. I know it's sudden, but the opportunity is incredible. I'd be crazy to turn it down, right? Something about the situation felt wrong to David. Rachel had never mentioned wanting to leave the city. She loved her current school and had just signed a lease on a new apartment. Why would she suddenly get such a perfect offer from a district she'd never applied to? Which company made the offer? David asked. Some education consulting firm called Meridian Learning Solutions. They said they'd been watching my work and thought I'd be perfect for the program. David's blood went cold. Meridian Learning Solutions was a subsidiary of Victoria's company. He'd seen the name on quarterly reports. That night, David couldn't sleep. He sat in his expensive apartment, staring out at the city lights, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was it really just a coincidence that Rachel got this offer right when their relationship was getting serious? He started paying attention to other details he previously overlooked. How did Victoria always seem to know when he had plans with friends? Why did work emergencies always happen on weekends when he tried to have a social life? How did she know so much about his personal schedule when he'd never told her? The answer came to him gradually, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. David's company phone was managed by the IT department. His company apartment came with security features that he'd never bothered to understand. His computer, his email, even his key card, everything was monitored and tracked. Victoria wasn't just his boss, she was watching his every move. The realization hit him during a late-night dinner meeting. Victoria was discussing quarterly projections, but David was barely listening. He was thinking about all the friends who'd mysteriously moved away, all the opportunities that had been dangled in front of people in his life, all the ways his world had been systematically narrowed down to just work and Victoria. You seem distracted tonight, Victoria said, interrupting his thoughts. David looked up to find her studying him with those intense green eyes. For the first time, her gaze didn't make him feel important. It made him feel trapped. I'm fine. He lied. Are you sure? You've been different lately, less focused. I hope you're not letting outside distractions interfere with your work. The way she said outside distractions made David's skin crawl. She knew about Rachel. She probably knew about everything. What exactly do you mean by distractions? David asked carefully. Victoria's smile was cold and sharp. Oh, you know, friends who don't understand the demands of success, family members who try to guilt you into wasting time on trivial visits, romantic interests who don't appreciate what you've built here. She knew. Of course she knew. David, Victoria continued, her voice taking on a softer, almost motherly tone. I care about you. That's why I have to protect you from influences that could derail your career. You're special. You have a gift for this work. But gifts can be wasted if you don't focus on developing them. David felt sick. Are you saying you've been interfering in my personal life? Victoria looked genuinely surprised by the question. Interfering. David, I've been helping you. I've been clearing away obstacles so you can reach your full potential. Everything I do is for your benefit." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "Before you met me, what were you? A nobody in a cubicle, living paycheck to paycheck, invisible to everyone around you. I saw your potential when no one else did. I gave you purpose, respect, financial security. I made you matter." Victoria stood up and walked around the table until she was standing directly behind his chair. David could feel her presence like a weight on his shoulders. "The people who've left your life," she said quietly, "they didn't really care about you. If they had, they would have supported your success instead of trying to drag you back down to their level. I'm the only one who truly understands what you're capable of." David wanted to argue, wanted to stand up and walk out, but he felt paralyzed. Everything Victoria was saying sounded reasonable on the surface, but underneath her words was something that felt like ownership. "I've invested too much time and energy in you to watch you throw it all away," Victoria continued. "You belong here, David, with me, with this company, and this life I've built for you. Don't you see how perfect it is?" As David sat there in that expensive restaurant, surrounded by the trappings of success, he finally understood the truth. He wasn't Victoria's advisor. He wasn't her trusted partner. He was her possession, and she had no intention of ever letting him go. David spent 3 sleepless weeks planning his escape. He couldn't stop thinking about Victoria's words that night at the restaurant. The way she'd said "you belong here" kept echoing in his head, like a warning bell that wouldn't stop ringing. He started researching other companies, quietly updating his resume, and reaching out to headhunters through his personal email. David was careful to do everything from his own apartment, using his personal laptop, never touching his work computer or phone for job search activities. The plan seemed simple enough. He'd been in his position for almost 2 years now. He had valuable experience, excellent references from his previous job, and a track record of success. Companies would want someone with his background. At least, that's what he thought. David's first hint that something was wrong came when he called his old boss, Peterson. Despite their awkward history, Peterson had always been decent to him, and David figured he'd be willing to provide a reference. "David?" Peterson sounded surprised to hear from him. "I thought you were happy working for Victoria." "I am, but I'm exploring other opportunities. You know how it is." There was a long pause. "Listen, David, I'm not sure I'm the right person to give you a reference right now. Things have been complicated since the merger. Maybe you should stick with what you have." The conversation ended quickly, leaving David confused. Peterson had seemed nervous, almost scared. Why would giving a reference be complicated? David tried calling his former colleague Kevin, who moved to another company after the merger. Same response: nervous, evasive, unwilling to help. By the 4th call, David realized something was seriously wrong. These people weren't just reluctant to help, they were afraid to help. But David pressed on. He had 3 interviews lined up with different companies, good positions, competitive salaries, opportunities to start fresh somewhere else. The first interview seemed to go well. The hiring manager, Robert, was impressed with David's experience and asked detailed questions about his work at Meridian Industries. They talked for over an hour, and Robert seemed genuinely interested in bringing David onto his team. "I'll be in touch within a few days," Robert promised as they shook hands. A week passed, nothing. David called to follow up, but Robert's assistant said he was in meetings. Another week passed, when David finally reached Robert directly. The man's tone had completely changed. "I'm sorry, David, but we've decided to go with another candidate, someone with a different skill set. Can I ask what changed?" The interview seemed to go really well. Another long pause. "Look, I'll be honest with you. We received some concerning information about your work history. Nothing official, you understand, but enough to make us reconsider." David's stomach dropped. "What kind of information?" "I can't get into specifics. I'm sorry, but our decision is final." The same thing happened with the other 2 interviews. Initial enthusiasm followed by sudden rejection. Vague references to concerns about his background. No one would give him details. David was starting to panic. How was Victoria finding out about his interviews? How was she sabotaging them? Then he remembered the contract he'd signed when he started working for Victoria. It had been thick, filled with legal language he hadn't fully understood at the time. He'd been so excited about the job offer that he'd barely read through it. David dug the contract out of his filing cabinet and started reading it carefully for the first time. What he found made his blood run cold. The non-compete clause was more extensive than anything he'd ever seen. It didn't just prevent him from working for direct competitors. It prevented him from working in any related industry for 3 years after leaving the company. Given how diversified Victoria's business empire was, that covered almost every major industry. But that wasn't the worst part. The contract included something called a training investment recovery clause. If David left the company within 5 years, he would be required to pay back not just his salary, but also the cost of training and development the company had invested in him. The calculations were complex, but David's rough math suggested he'd owe close to $500,000. David had never received any special training. His development had consisted of on-the-job experience and access to Victoria's meetings. But according to this contract, every day he worked was an investment the company could claim back. There was more. Confidentiality agreements that would prevent him from discussing his work for 10 years. Clauses about intellectual property that suggested any ideas he'd had while working for the company belonged to them permanently. Language about professional reputation that seemed to give Victoria the right to share her assessment of his work performance with future employers. David realized he'd essentially signed away his freedom without knowing it. But surely these clauses weren't enforceable? David decided to consult with a lawyer. He found a well-regarded employment attorney downtown and scheduled a consultation. The meeting didn't go as David had hoped. These clauses are aggressive, the lawyer admitted, studying David's contract. But they're not necessarily illegal. The non-compete might be challengeable, but it would be expensive to fight and the outcome would be uncertain. What about the training cost recovery? I never received any special training. The lawyer pointed to a section David had missed. It says here that training includes mentorship, strategic consultation, executive development, and access to proprietary business methods. Working directly with a CEO could arguably qualify as all of those things. David felt the walls closing in, so I'm trapped not necessarily. But leaving would be financially devastating. And the lawyer hesitated. What? I have to disclose that my firm has done work for Castellane Group companies in the past. There could be a conflict of interest if I represent you against them. You might want to find a different attorney. David tried for more law firms. Same story every time. Previous business relationships with Victoria's companies created conflicts of interest that prevented them from helping him. David was beginning to understand how deep Victoria's influence ran. She hadn't just trapped him with contracts, she'd made it nearly impossible for him to get help escaping those contracts. A month after his failed job search began, Victoria called David into her office. She was sitting behind her massive desk, smiling like she had wonderful news to share. I've been thinking about your future with the company, she said. You've been doing excellent work, and I think it's time for a promotion. David's mouth went dry. A promotion? Senior Vice President of Strategic Development. Significant salary increase. Stock options. Your own assistant. You'd be part of my executive team. Involved in every major decision we make. She slid a folder across the desk. Toward him, the new contract reflects your increased responsibilities and compensation. Much more generous than your current arrangement. David opened the folder with trembling hands. The salary increase was substantial. More money than he'd ever imagined making, but he couldn't focus on the numbers. He was looking for the clauses that would tighten the chains around him even further. They were there. Extended non-compete periods, higher financial penalties for leaving, more restrictive confidentiality agreements. This is quite generous, David managed to say. Victoria's smile widened. I take care of the people who are important to me. You've proven your loyalty and competence. This is my way of showing appreciation. She leaned back in her chair, studying his face, of course. The offer does come with increased expectations. The confidentiality requirements are more stringent, and the company's investment in your continued development would be significantly higher. David understood the subtext: accept the promotion, and the cage becomes more comfortable but even harder to escape. Refuse it, and Victoria would know he was trying to leave. I need some time to think about it, David said. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Of course, though I should mention that this opportunity won't remain open indefinitely. I need someone I can count on completely. That evening, David sat in his luxury apartment, staring at the promotion offer. Outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sparkled with lights and possibilities he could no longer reach. He was trapped between two impossible choices: accept Victoria's golden cage and surrender what remained of his freedom, or refuse and face financial ruin, legal battles he couldn't afford, and a professional reputation that Victoria could destroy with a few well-placed phone calls. For the first time since this nightmare began, David understood the full scope of Victoria's control. She hadn't just chosen him as an employee, she'd chosen him as a possession. And she'd spent 2 years making sure he could never choose to leave. The promotion offer lay on his coffee table like a beautiful poison. David knew that whatever choice he made, Victoria had already won. She owned him completely, and they both knew it. David didn't sleep for 3 days after Victoria offered him the promotion. He kept staring at the contract, reading the same clauses over and over, looking for some loophole he might have missed, but there wasn't one. Victoria's lawyers had crafted the perfect trap. On the 4th day, something inside David snapped. He couldn't live like this anymore. He couldn't pretend everything was normal while Victoria controlled every aspect of his existence. If he was going to be destroyed, at least he'd go down fighting. David started documenting everything. He began with his personal observations, writing down every instance of manipulation he could remember. The mysterious job offers that had pulled his friends away, the work emergencies that always seemed to coincide with his personal plans, the way Victoria always knew details about his life that he'd never shared with her. Then he got more systematic. Using his access to company systems, David began searching for evidence of Victoria's surveillance network. He found contracts with private security firms that specialized in executive protection and monitoring. He discovered budget line items for personnel management services that seemed to have nothing to do with normal HR functions. The breakthrough came when David accessed the building's security system logs. His key card didn't just track when he entered and left the building. It tracked every room he visited, every elevator he took, even how long he spent in the bathroom. The system had been recording his movements for 2 years. But that was nothing compared to what he found in his apartment. David's luxury corporate housing came with a smart home system that he'd always assumed was just for convenience. The automated lights, the programmable thermostat, the high-tech security cameras. He thought they were perks of executive living. He was wrong. Everything was monitored, every conversation, every phone call, every moment of his private life had been recorded and stored. Victoria hadn't just been watching his professional behavior. She'd been studying him, like a laboratory specimen. David found files with his name on them that contained detailed psychological profiles, his sleep patterns, his eating habits, his emotional responses to different situations. There were notes about his family relationships, his romantic history, even his childhood fears that he mentioned in casual conversations. The files painted a picture of someone who'd been completely analyzed and understood. Victoria knew exactly which buttons to push, which fears to exploit, which desires to dangle in front of him. She'd been playing him like a chess master, moving pieces around a board. But the most disturbing discovery was a folder labeled Asset Management, Long-Term Planning. Inside were documents that treated David like a business investment, charts showing the return on investment of keeping him isolated from outside influences, cost-benefit analyses of different control strategies, timelines for increasing his dependence on the company over the next 5 years. There was even a section about succession planning, what Victoria would do if David became too difficult to manage. The options included character assassination, legal action, and something called professional neutralization that David didn't want to think about too deeply. Victoria had been planning his entire future without his knowledge or consent. In her mind, he wasn't a person with his own goals and dreams. He was a valuable asset that needed to be protected and controlled. David printed everything. He made backup copies on multiple flash drives. He prepared a detailed report that laid out Victoria's entire system of manipulation and control. Then he requested a meeting with Victoria. She seemed pleased when he walked into her office that Friday afternoon. "David, I was hoping you made a decision about the promotion. The board is eager to announce your new position." David sat down across from her desk and pulled out a thick folder. "I've made a decision, but not the one you're expecting." Victoria's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, I know everything," David said quietly. "The surveillance, the manipulation, the files you've been keeping on me. I know about the private investigators who drove my friends away. I know about the lawyers you've made sure I can't hire. I know about the psychological profiles and the long-term planning documents." Victoria's face went completely blank. For a moment, she looked like a different person entirely, cold, calculating, dangerous. Then she laughed. "David, you sound paranoid. I think you've been working too hard. Maybe you should take some time off. I have documentation." David continued. "Screenshots, printed files, recorded conversations. Everything you've done to control my life for the past 2 years." Victoria stood up and walked to the window, her back to him. When she spoke again, her voice was calm but somehow more terrifying than if she'd been angry. "Let's say, hypothetically, that what you're claiming is true. What exactly do you think you can do about it?" She turned around, and David saw something in her eyes that made his blood freeze. This wasn't the caring mentor who'd guided his career. This wasn't even the demanding boss who'd pushed him to succeed. This was someone who viewed him as property that had gotten out of line. "You could try to expose me," Victoria continued conversationally, "but who would believe you? A disgruntled employee making wild accusations against one of the most respected businesswomen in the country? The media would tear you apart." She walked closer to his chair. "You could try to sue me, but we both know you can't afford the legal fees. And even if you could, those contracts you sign give me every right to monitor and manage my key personnel." Victoria leaned against her desk, studying him like a scientist examining an interesting bug. "You could try to quit, but we've already established how financially devastating that would be. You'd owe the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. Your career would be over. Your family would suffer." David felt his carefully planned confrontation falling apart. "People have rights. This isn't legal. Legal is whatever the most expensive. Lawyers say it is," Victoria replied with a shrug. "And I can afford much better lawyers than you can." She sat back down, her expression softening into something that might have been sympathy. If David didn't know better, "David, I'm not the villain. In this story, I'm the person who saw your potential when no one else did. I'm the one who gave you opportunities, financial security, and a purpose in life. Before me, you were nothing. Without me, you'll be nothing again." Victoria opened her desk drawer and pulled out a new contract, thicker than the promotion offer she'd given him before. "I'm prepared to be very generous," she said. "Significant salary increase, stock options that will make you wealthy, and a clear path to executive leadership. All I ask in return is your complete loyalty and commitment." She slid the contract across the desk. "Or you can walk out that door right now, face the lawsuits, the financial ruin, the professional blacklisting, spend the rest of your life working minimum wage jobs and wondering what might have been." David stared at the contract without touching it. "And if I sign this, then you acknowledge that everything I've done has been for your benefit. You agree that your previous concerns were based on misunderstandings, and you commit to staying with this company for the next 10 years. Victoria's smile returned, but now it looked more like a predator showing its teeth. "Think of it as a partnership, David. I provide the resources and opportunities, you provide the talent and dedication. It's a fair exchange. What if I refuse?" Victoria's expression didn't change, but her voice became colder. then I'll be very disappointed. And when I'm disappointed in someone, I tend to share that disappointment with others, your family. For instance, did you know your sister Amy just applied for a mortgage? It would be unfortunate if questions arose about her brother's professional integrity and your parents' retirement savings. They're mutual funds managed by one of my subsidiary companies. The threat was clear without being explicit. Victoria didn't just control David's life. She could reach out and touch anyone he cared about. David looked at the contract again, then back at Victoria's expectant face. In that moment, he understood the full scope of his situation. She hadn't just trapped him professionally and financially. She made herself essential to his family's well-being. She'd woven herself so deeply into his life that cutting her out would destroy everything he cared about. You're insane, David whispered. Victoria tilted her head thoughtfully. I prefer to think of myself as thorough. I identify valuable assets, and I protect my investments. You're valuable, David, much too valuable to let go. She gestured toward the contract. The choice is yours. Accept your place in the organization and enjoy the benefits of being essential to someone who values you, or throw it all away for some abstract concept of freedom that was always an illusion anyway. David's hand shook as he reached for the pen on Victoria's desk. He thought about his parents, his sister, the life he'd built before Victoria entered it. He thought about the friends who'd been driven away, the opportunities that had been stolen from him, the person he'd been before she'd decided to remake him. But he also thought about the alternative, the lawsuits, the financial ruin, the possibility that Victoria's reach extended far enough to destroy not just him, but everyone he loved. As David's signature appeared on the contract, Victoria's smile became genuinely warm for the first time in months.